While you listen to this sentence, there are about 60 suns gathered within 17 light years of the chair where you are sitting right now. 60 bonfires scattered in the darkness around you, each one a sun in its own right. Some much older than ours, a handful of them cradling worlds that slowly spin in the cold. For billions of years, without anyone ever having looked at them up close. It's a real neighborhood with houses, with distances, with silent streets that fade into the darkness. And from what science has been able to determine so far, almost no one is home. And here's the strange part. Of those 60 suns in all your years under the sky, your eyes have only found 9. 9 points of light that you can point out on a clear night, without a telescope, without binoculars, just with the eyesight you were born with. The other 50 or so are simply invisible, too faint, too dim to register on a human retina, burning unseen in all directions around you. Right now, while you read or listen to this in some well-lit room, the street where you live, in this sense, is a street you've never truly seen. That's the answer. It's the discomfort behind the question that gives this video its name. You've never seen your closest neighbors. Not out of carelessness, not because no one told you. It's the physics of light that decides that for you without asking permission. And this is the story of how the human species gradually, painfully, discovered who lives on this street. It goes from the nearest door to the farthest one ever knocked on, and each door responds in a different way. One responds with fire. Another doesn't respond at all because it's invisible, even to the instruments that search for it. A third hides a corpse behind the brightest facade in the entire sky. For almost all of our species' history, no one had any idea how far away those homes were. Stars were just lights, and light alone doesn't carry any distance that you can read with the naked eye. You can look at a candle 3 meters away and a lighthouse 3 kilometers away, and if their intensities match, both will look equally bright. That was exactly the problem that held back astronomy for 2,000 years. In the winter of 1838, in the Prussian city of Königsberg, which is now called Kaliningrad and is in Russia, an astronomer of almost inhuman patience named Friedrich Bessel decided to solve this problem. Night after night, for more than a whole year, using an instrument built by the lens grinder Joseph von Fraunhofer, he kept his gaze fixed on a star, a single, faint, and completely unremarkable star. A dim pair in the constellation of Cygnus, catalogued as 61 Cygni, and he measured, night after night, the almost imperceptible way it seemed to shift as the Earth revolved around the sun. On most nights, the star hardly moved at all, but slowly, measurement after measurement, a number began to emerge from the noise, until the sky finally revealed the secret it had kept for millennia. That unimpressive little star, discovered by Bessel in 1838, was about 10 light years away. It was the first time in the entire history of our species that a human being knew, in real and honest terms, how far away the neighbor's door was.
When the news reached England, the astronomer John Herschel immediately understood the magnitude of what had happened.
Herschel in 1841.
When honoring Bessel for his achievement, described it as the moment when the sounding line in the ocean of stars had finally touched the bottom. For thousands of years, humanity had been gazing at the ocean of night with no way to measure its depth. And now, for the first time, the line had gone down, 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 and hit something solid. But there is a small, silent tragedy hidden right next to this triumph. Down in the far south, at the Cape of Good Hope, a Scottish astronomer named Thomas Henderson had actually measured the distance to another star a few years earlier. And not just any star, Alpha Centauri, the closest of them all. Henderson had the numbers in hand since the early 1830s, but he doubted them. He checked again. He doubted them once more. And when he finally gathered the confidence to publish, it was 1839 months after Bessel had already appeared in print. The first map of the neighborhood was almost signed by Henderson. He lost it not for lack of talent, but because of his own caution and an entire season wasted in doubt. That's all. Before taking another step down the street, you need a ruler to measure the distance between the houses. And the ruler is the closest house of all, our own sun. It is the reference lamp for the entire neighborhood, the only house whose distance humanity has always known exactly. Its light crosses the void between it and the Earth in about 8 minutes. And this distance from the Earth to the sun has a name, 1 astronomical unit. 8 minutes of light. 8 minutes is enough time to make coffee. It's enough time to read 2 pages of a book or to wait for a late bus. It's within this small domestic scale that the entire distance between the Earth and the source of all the light and all the heat that has ever existed on this planet fits. It's worth holding on to this number because it's the last time in this whole journey that anything will be measured in minutes. Every other door on this street, each of the 60-something houses scattered in the darkness, is so much farther away that no one counts the light in minutes anymore. It's counted in years. The closest of them, the next house on the street, is more than 4 whole light years away, even for a beam racing at the limit and never slowing down. The fastest thing that exists in the known universe. That's the real shape of this street. Not minutes, but the long and slow years that light itself needs to spend to cross the darkness between one house and another. So this is the first door. It belongs to a small red ember called Proxima Centauri, and it's the closest sun to ours in all existence. There is nothing closer anywhere. And yet, despite being so close, no human eye has ever seen it with the naked eye. It is too faint, like a glowing ember burning low against the dark, invisible without a telescope, even though there is nothing in the universe closer to you than this. But the house is not empty. Orbiting around this faint red star is a world called Proxima b, roughly the size of Earth, crossing the narrow band around its sun, where, in principle, liquid water could survive on the surface. The discovery was confirmed in 2016, and the astronomer who led the discovery, Guilhem Anglada Escudet, described it at the time as just the first step. The search for signs of life on Proxima b would come later. A second, smaller world, named Proxima d, was confirmed in the following years, and there is still an unconfirmed suspicion of a third, more distant body orbiting that same star. The closest house on the whole street, then, has lights on in the window.
But when you get closer, the reception turns sour, because the owner of that house is violent.
Proxima Centauri is what astronomers call a flare star, and it doesn't burn calm and steady like our sun. On May 1st, 2019, astronomers witnessed a single superflare that made the star about 14,000 times brighter in the far ultraviolet in a matter of seconds. And that wasn't a rare event. This star unleashes at least 5 superflares of that magnitude every year. There was even a night in March 2016 when it erupted with such violence that for a few minutes, this ember that no human eye had ever seen would have been visible in the sky to the naked eye. The invisible house on the street suddenly shining bright enough to be found without any telescope at all. Fire again. always fire. Simulations suggest that a sequence of events like this could strip away 90% of the ozone from an Earth-like atmosphere in just 5 years. And that during one of these explosions, the ultraviolet radiation reaching the ground would be about 100 times the dose that kills the most resistant microbes ever found anywhere on Earth. Meredith McGregor, one of the astronomers who studied this 2019 explosion, summed up the finding in a straightforward way. A human on that planet, she said, would have a terrible time. The nearest house has lights in the window, and the lights are fire. And even if you could survive the fire, the house itself is strange in a way that no home on Earth prepares anyone to understand. Proxima b is so close to its weak red sun, completing an orbit every 11 days, that gravity has almost certainly locked the world and stopped its rotation, keeping one side facing the star forever. On one side, a day that never ends. On the other, a night that has lasted for billions of years and will never see the sunrise. If anything survives there, it survives in the seam between the two sides, in a permanent ring of twilight surrounding a world that cannot spin. That's what the habitable zone really offers right next door. Not a second Earth, a place stranger than human language was built to describe. I'm still not sure if that's the most disturbing or the most beautiful part of the story. The fact that the closest neighbor of all might even have a world the size of ours and still be an impossible place to live. Not because of a lack of rock or water, but because its own sun refuses to calm down. And of course, knowing that there is a neighbor so close, humanity has already dreamed of visiting. Not long ago, there was a serious and generously funded plan to do exactly that. An initiative called Breakthrough Starshot, which envisioned an entire fleet of tiny probes, the size of a postage stamp, being pushed by a powerful beam of laser light through the darkness, all the way to that same star. But the dream quietly faded away. The program was never formally canceled. It was just put on hold, with most of the promised money never actually being spent, according to reports that have followed the quiet conclusion of the initiative in recent years.
And the reason why this dream is so brutally difficult is written in a single number. The fastest machines humanity has ever launched, the probes that have already crossed the edge of the solar system, would take something like 70 to 75,000 years to reach that same star, the closest one of all. This is the crossing. And the crossing is a story in itself. For now, this journey is not about traveling.
It's just about reading the map.
And right next to that weak red ember are two more houses, the grandest on the whole street. They are the two stars of Alpha Centauri, a golden and warm pair very similar to our own sun, bound together by gravity, slowly orbiting each other. They are the two closest stars that actually resemble ours, the two doors that, more than any others, remind us of home. Alpha Centauri A has almost the same mass and the same yellowish color as our sun. Alpha Centauri B is a little smaller and more orange, but still recognizable, still familiar, the way a distant relative is familiar even after decades without contact.
The two take about 80 years to complete a full orbit, orbiting one another, bound by a gravity that neither of them will ever be able to break.
Last year, observing one of them through the largest telescope ever launched into space, astronomers captured the faint outline of a giant world moving through the star's light. And when they looked again, months later, it had simply disappeared, swallowed back by the brightness of its own sun. To this day, that world remains only a candidate, not confirmed. A team from the California Institute of Technology is still reanalyzing the data, trying to understand if that was really a planet or just a trick of the light. This is the map that Bessel started. 60 houses, 9 that your eyes will someday see, and the closest of all already setting its own worlds on fire. The deeper you go down this street, the stranger the neighbors become. There is a house where the planets seem to die and come back to life over and over again, discovered, disproved, and then quietly discovered again. There is a house that no eye and no instrument on Earth managed to find until almost the day before yesterday, in cosmic terms, even though it was there, in plain sight the whole time. And there is a house, quiet and unremarkable from the outside, with a corpse lying cold in the living room. The first of these 13 is the house where planets seem to die and be reborn. It belongs to a small red ember called Barnard's star, sitting about 6 light years from the chair where you are right now. And it is old, almost beyond measure. Perhaps 10 billion years have passed since it first ignited, which makes it more than twice the age of our own sun, a coal that was already old when the Earth was still cooling and taking shape. And it doesn't stay still in the street. Of all the stars in the sky, this is the one that moves the fastest, gliding a visible distance across the heavens year after year. It was a careful American astronomer named Edward Barnard who first detected this movement in 1916, a runner among all these silent houses. It's worth keeping this detail in mind because it will matter again. But it's the worlds around this house that make it a heartbreaking story. 3 different times, respected astronomers studied the slight wobble of the star and announced planets orbiting it. A good part of the world believed it, until that wobble turned out to be a flaw in his own telescope. A ghost born from the instrument, not from the sky. Then, in 2018, a world larger than Earth was announced there. And for 3 years, it remained listed in the catalogs as real, until it also dissolved, revealed as nothing more than an echo of the star's own slow rotation, a pulse mistaken for a planet.
Twice, the house had lights in the window, and twice the lights went out, revealed as reflections of the very desire of those who searched. At this point, it would be easy to give up on the place for good.
Is it worth spending a moment on the first of these ghosts? Because it's one of the most cited episodes in the history of planet hunting. The astronomer behind the announcement in the 60s had spent decades photographing this same star, convinced he had found proof of worlds around it by the slight wobble in its movement captured on the plates. The problem, discovered only later, was that the very telescope used in the observations had undergone a mechanical adjustment in the middle of the series of measurements. And that adjustment alone produced exactly the kind of periodic wobble that looked like a planet. There was no world at all. There was just a screw tightened on a lens. Science, in this case, took decades to learn to even distrust its own ruler. And then, finally, something real. In October 2024, using an instrument in Chile, precise enough to feel a star tremble, at a walking pace, astronomers found Barnard B, a genuine world, this time for real. With just over half the mass of Venus, completing a full orbit around the star every 3 days, too close and too hot for anything to survive. The astronomer Joné González Hernández, who led the work, handled the long wait with simplicity. Even though it took so long, he said, the team was always confident that there was something there to be found and that there would be more to come. And he was right. By March 2025, the count had already risen to 4 confirmed planets, the smallest worlds ever found anywhere by this detection method. 4 little rocks spinning in tight, fast, crowded orbits. But here the old cruelty of home returns. Each of the four is squeezed within the inner edge of what's called the habitable zone, and none of them is a place where anything alive could hold on. And just a few weeks ago, the verdict became even harsher. A new study published in 2026 by a team from the University of Chicago, led by the astronomer Hitesh Hrithvik, Basanti weighed these four little worlds and concluded that all of them are water poor, describing the whole family, in the study's own words, as extremely uninhabitable. An old and silent library. Basanti described what haunts this entire street in silence. Barnard's star is a cosmic neighbor, he said, and yet we know so little about it. Four real worlds, finally, after a whole century of ghosts, and each of them dead on arrival. And we can't forget that this house is on the move. Barnard's star is moving toward the solar system right now while you're listening to this. And in about 11,800 years, it will pass closer to Earth than Alpha Centauri is today, making it, for a time, the closest neighbor of all, before sliding past Earth and disappearing again into the darkness. Even this map being drawn now is just a temporary thing. The second door is stranger than the first because you simply can't see it. You never could. No human being who has ever existed has laid eyes on the house called Wolf 359, a red dwarf less than 8 light years away, carrying only about 1/10 of the mass of our sun. It was pulled from the darkness a little over a century ago by the German astronomer Max Wolf, around 1918, and not even with the naked eye. He found it on photographic plates, glass that patiently gathered light that no living retina could ever hold. And here's the part that should bother anyone listening to this right now. That invisible house is not the exception on the street, it's the rule. 3 out of every 4 stars in the entire galaxy are small red dwarfs, just like this one. And no red dwarf anywhere in the sky is bright enough to be seen with the naked eye. What this really means is that almost the entire galaxy is made up of stars that no one has ever seen and no one will ever see. The Milky Way contains somewhere between 100 and 400 billion stars, and the overwhelming majority of them will never be more than a number in a table. Never a little point of light that someone points out to another person on a clear night. You've never seen your closest neighbors, and the statistic behind that statement is exactly that. Invisibility isn't an accident of the neighborhood, it's its normal condition. And you shouldn't confuse this invisibility with peace. Wolf 359 has no confirmed planets, no world you can point to with any real confidence. And the home itself is far from gentle. It's a violent flare star, a small red furnace that crackles and erupts without warning, sending out bursts of radiation capable of sterilizing anything unlucky enough to be nearby. The quietest looking door on the whole street is, in secret, one of the most furious. And there's an almost funny, strange footnote here. When science fiction writers look for a place to set one of the most famous space battles in pop culture, they chose this very star. This weak and invisible ember is precisely the closest door that absolutely no one has ever truly known. This is the true weight of this second home. It's not a strange, isolated story. It's a statistic. This neighborhood and the entire galaxy that contains it overwhelmingly belong to the stars that humanity cannot see. No one saw it.
The first door is the one everyone knows.
It's the brightest star in the entire night sky. The only house on this whole street that every human who ever existed has seen, named, and used to guide ships.
Serious.
A little more than 8.5 light years away, shining bluish white above any horizon on Earth. And it's the only door with another celestial body behind it.
The man who first suspected this was the same old acquaintance from the beginning of this journey, Friedrich Bessel, the patient astronomer who first measured the true distance to a star. In 1844, observing Sirius wobble from side to side in the sky, as if something invisible was regularly pulling the star, he predicted that a dark and hidden companion must be orbiting nearby. He wrote something about this line of reasoning that became the phrase that sums up everything this entire journey is trying to say. The existence of countless visible stars proves nothing against the existence of countless invisible stars. Bessel died without ever getting to see the thing he had predicted. 18 years later, it appeared. On January 31, 1862, a lens grinder named Albrecht Alvin Clark was testing a brand new telescope in Massachusetts. His large glass lens, almost 47 centimeters in diameter, was pointed at Sirius, and there, right next to the dazzling star, a faint point of light appeared. It was the companion that Bessel had promised, and it was the first white dwarf that human eyes had ever seen. What Clark found was not a living star, it was a corpse. Sirius B was once the owner of this house. A star maybe 5 times more massive than our sun, which burned through its entire life a long time ago and then collapsed. What's left of it now is squeezed almost beyond comprehension. All the mass of our sun compressed into a body no bigger than the Earth, where a few tons of matter fit into every cubic centimeter, still shining at about 25,000 degrees Celsius and slowly cooling forever into darkness. It stopped shining as a living star more than 100 million years ago. Body, right there, next to the most photographed star in the night sky. And so, the brightest house on the whole street, the only door that any child on Earth has ever found without even needing to look, keeps its own dead, laid out cold in the front room. White corpse circling the living star every 50 years around and around, never stopping. And here is the silent twist that should follow you home after this video. Sirius B is not alone over there. Within those same 17 light years of your chair, there are at least other bodies like this. Dead stars, white dwarfs, each one with a corpse sealed inside it. Put that number next to the mere 9 stars your eyes will ever be able to find in the sky, and the arithmetic gets cold. For every 2 living stars your eyes will find on this street, somewhere nearby there's a hidden body you can't see. The neighborhood is quieter and colder than anyone looking up from a porch ever imagined. A white dwarf like Sirius B is not a rare type of dead star. It is actually the most common fate among all the stars in the universe, including the sun itself. About 5 billion years from now, after swelling up and swallowing the inner orbits of the solar system, that's what will be left of it too. A white ember, the size of Earth, slowly cooling for the rest of the existence of the cosmos. The brightest star in the sky is, unintentionally, showing humanity the very future of its sun. Parked right next to it, shining for a century and a half before any telescope could separate the 2 lights. After fire, invisibility, and a corpse, the last door on this stretch of the street gets a gentler knock. It belongs to Ross 128, a red dwarf about 11 light years away. And unlike its violent cousins down the street, this one is old and calm. A stable star that doesn't go into a rage, that hardly ever erupts. Quietly orbiting around it, confirmed in 2017 by a team from the La Silla Observatory in Chile, using the HARPS spectrograph, is a world called ROS 128b. with at least 1 1/3 times the mass of Earth, circling its gentle sun every 10 days, right on the inner edge of the habitable zone. If any door on this entire street has a light in the window that isn't made of fire, maybe it's this one. But it's better to handle that hope with care, because this world would only be temperate if its atmosphere cooperated. And like almost every world so close to a red dwarf, it's almost certainly tidally locked, with one side always facing the star and the other side always facing a night that never ends. It's pretty much a portrait of Proxima b, again only under a gentler light, the same tidal locking, the same sharp line between eternal day and eternal night, but around a star that isn't constantly exploding. A gentler version of the same geometric trap that seems to await almost everyone who lives too close to a red dwarf. And there's one last irony waiting at that door. In 2017, a strange radio signal seemed to come from this very star, and for about a week the whole world wondered if it had finally heard a voice coming from a neighbor. It hadn't. The signal turned out to be interference from Earth's own satellites. The human machinery ends up reflecting weakly back to itself. The only voice ever heard on this entire street was the human echo itself, mistaken for a heartbeat that belonged to someone else. So that's what the doors have delivered up to this point. One by one, knock after knock, the answers came back as fire, as invisibility, as a corpse, and as the lone cautious maybe. But the deepest doors, the ones still waiting at the far edge of the map, hold the strangest answer of all. A neighborhood that humanity is only now beginning to discover, and a house in which it believed wholeheartedly, named, mapped, desired, and that was never really there. There is something humbling at this point in the journey that is worth acknowledging honestly. Humanity does not have, even today, a finished map of this street. Not even a complete list of the houses on the block itself. There is a small, quiet, and ancient star called Teegarden's star, sitting just 12 light years from the chair where you are right now, closer than several of the houses already visited on this journey. It's an old, weak ember, calm and inconspicuous. And it stayed there, in the darkness, the whole time, during every century in which human beings looked up and counted stars. And yet, it was only discovered in 2003 by a team led by the scientist Bernard Teegarden, using data from the infrared survey known as the 2-micron all-sky survey. Not 2,000 years ago, not even 2 centuries ago, within the lifetime of practically anyone listening to this sentence right now. A door so close, on a street that humanity was sure it already knew completely, and that was only noticed there a little over 2 decades ago. And the Teegarden star isn't even the most unsettling of these late arrivals. The third closest star system to our sun in all of existence, closer than almost every place we've visited on this journey so far, was only discovered in 2013. It's called Lumen 16. And it's not a home. There are 2. A pair held together by gravity, leaning against each other in the darkness, slowly spinning on the edge of the threshold. And even stranger, they're not even real stars. They're brown dwarfs, failed stars, objects that came together from the cold and reached the fire without ever actually igniting it. Too small to ignite, now shining only with the dim, slow heat of their own collapse. 2 faint embers that tried to become suns and failed, sitting almost right on the front doorstep. And that humanity passed by without noticing throughout the entire history of the species until just over a decade ago. A brown dwarf doesn't have enough mass to ignite the hydrogen fusion that makes a star truly shine. It only has enough mass to shine a little, faintly in the infrared, with the residual heat from its own formation, cooling slowly over billions of years, never having had the chance to be a sun. The astronomer Kevin Lehman, who identified the pair in 2013 using data from the WISE Infrared Space Telescope, described at the time the surprise of finding something so close so late.
This is the truth that the map keeps whispering softly. New doors keep appearing on a street that humanity was absolutely sure it had already walked all the way through.
So it's finally time to ask the question that this whole journey has been circling around since the beginning. On this long street of fire, of corpses, and of houses that no human eye can find, is there somewhere a window with a gentle light shining in it? A gentle light that isn't made of fire?
Maybe. Around that old and quiet star, T-Garden star, orbits a world called T-Garden b. And by careful measurement, it is among the most Earth-like worlds ever found anywhere in the sky, circling its calm and stable sun at a gentle and unhurried distance. And there is that cautious may be found at the last doorway of the previous stretch, the temperate world orbiting its own patient and aged star. These, of all that has been found, are the closest things to a lit window that this long search has ever revealed. They are the best kind of good news. But it's worth holding this light very carefully in your hands, because each of these windows comes wrapped in the same hard and unyielding honesty. A place within the habitable zone is not the same as a habitable place. The zone is just a line drawn on a map where liquid water could exist if everything else went right. And almost never does everything work out. For T-Garden b, a recent study estimates there's about a 3 in 100 chance that the planet even managed to retain an atmosphere through all these ages. 3 chances in 100 that there's any air there to breathe, any sky capable of holding a cloud. The lit window, when examined up close, might turn out to be just a trick of the glass. Here is the disagreement that might be worth noting. There's a way to tell this story that makes the habitable zone sound like a promise, when in fact it's just the first filter of a brutal sieve. Most science communication treats this concept as a synonym for a second Earth. And that's not honest about what the data itself shows. The habitable zone is not where life is. It's just where life, in theory, wouldn't be immediately impossible. And even so, slowly, humanity's tools are starting to catch up with its desire. For almost all of history, it was only possible to guess at these homes by reading the tiny wobble of a star pulled by something invisible, or by the faint shadow of a world crossing in front of it. The worlds themselves had never been seen directly. Then, in July 2024, using the largest telescope ever launched into space, astronomers did something quietly new. They took a real photograph of a giant world. A ball of atmosphere heavier than Jupiter, orbiting a sun called Epsilon Indi, about 12 light years away. It's one of the coldest worlds ever photographed directly. A planet hovering near the freezing point of water, instead of being incandescent and scorched like almost everything else at that distance. And only this year, by looking more closely at that faint speck of light, astronomers found clouds of water ice suspended in its distant sky. It's worth pausing for a second to consider what this really means. Humanity no longer builds these houses just from oscillations and shadows in the data. For the first time, it began, weakly and timidly, to look straight through the windows and read the weather on the other side of the glass. Another door on that street began to speak to humanity in a different way. A small red dwarf called YZ7, about 12 light years away, emits a curious and repetitive radio pulse over and over again, in a steady rhythm coming out of the darkness. It's almost certainly not a voice, and no serious astronomer, since the signal was identified in 2023, has ever claimed that it was. What it could be is something much quieter and, in its own way, more wonderful. It could be the first signal ever captured from a small rocky world, sustaining its own magnetic field. An invisible planet and its star pulling on each other through magnetism, faintly singing across space as it happens. And that same invisible shield, that same magnetic embrace, silent, it's exactly what allows planet Earth itself to keep its air and oceans, instead of slowly losing them, ripped away and thrown into the void. Door by door, faint light by faint light, humanity is learning to read these windows. And now, we come to the last door of the night, and it's the saddest one on the whole street. Just beyond the edge of what this journey has been calling close. About 20 light years from the chair where you're sitting, there's another red dwarf, a small, faint, and ordinary star cataloged as Gliese 581. And for a few short and dazzling years, it was the most famous address in the entire sky. Because in 2010, astronomers announced a world orbiting that star, Gliese 581g, a planet about the size of Earth, sitting right in the warm and gentle middle of the habitable zone. Not on the scorched inner edge, where the little worlds of Barnard's star crowd together and burn, nor in the dark, frozen outer edge, but right in the center of the temperate band. It was celebrated around the world as the first truly habitable planet ever found beyond our own sun. One of the astronomers who participated in the discovery, Stephen Vogt, liked the find so much that he gave it a human nickname, Zarmina. Artists painted imagined oceans and rocky coastlines shining under a red and hazy sky. For a brief and breathless moment, the entire human species believed it had finally found the lit window. A second Earth, real and true, close enough, almost, for them to dream of reaching. And then, slowly and terribly, the dream dissolved in everyone's hands. Careful follow-up work, done calmly and patiently by other astronomers checking the numbers, showed that the signal had never been a planet. It was just the star's own breathing, its restless pulse of activity, misinterpreted by hopeful and longing eyes, as if it were a world. One of the astronomers who debunked the beloved planet said it in the most direct way possible. Gliese 581g, he declared, does not exist. The most beloved house on the entire street, the one humanity had named, painted, and longed for, was never actually built. Real worlds still orbit that same faint red star, worlds that today we are confident truly exist. But the one everyone had fallen in love with was a ghost, a shape painted onto an empty patch of sky by human longing itself. And here is the part that should stay with you after all the numbers from tonight has already faded from memory. The human voice is already on its way there. In October 2008, from a large radio antenna on the coast of the Black Sea in Crimea, 501 messages written by more than 500,000 people from all over the Earth were gathered. And they were aimed precisely at that star, Gliese 581, and sent into the darkness. That signal is still traveling tonight, still crossing the darkness between the homes. The prediction is that it will arrive at the beginning of 2029, less than 3 years from the night this sentence is being heard now. It will reach a faint red star where the most desired world was never real. And it will knock, softly and patiently, on a door that doesn't exist. And no one, anywhere, will ever answer. No one will. There's one thing that took me a long time to really understand in this whole story, and it's this. The reason humanity took so long to discover such close neighbors was never a lack of curiosity. It was the very geometry of light itself. A star a few light years away and a flashlight a few kilometers away look exactly the same to our eyes. A faint point against the darkness. There's only one way to tell them apart. Measure, with absurd precision, a displacement smaller than the width of a human hair seen from the other side of a city. Bessel needed an entire year of nights to do this just once. And it was only after that that the ruler for the entire neighborhood could be built. A ruler made of patience, not technology. That might be the part that the popular version of this story usually skips. Bessel's telescope was not, by today's standards, an extraordinary instrument. What was extraordinary was the habit of coming back night after night, year after year, to measure again the same thing that was too small for most people to think it was worth it. And that's what the doors, all together, have delivered so far. One by one, knock after knock, the answers came back like fire and like invisibility, and like a corpse. And as the only cautious maybe, 9 houses that your own eyes can find on a clear night. 60 odd that they'll never be able to find. Embers that ignite their own worlds. Corpses lying cold in the front room. Failed stars that reach for the flame and miss the mark. And here and there, faint, unconfirmed, shrouded in every possible doubt. A single window that maybe, just maybe, is holding a small light that is not fire. This entire street was walked tonight, starting from the nearest doorstep, door to door, knocking on each one at a time. And with all that, humanity only reached the handful of houses closest to the edge of an ocean that has no other side. The neighborhood is stranger, quieter, and colder than anyone looking up from a doorstep ever imagined. You've never seen your closest neighbors. Most of them you'll never see. But they're there. Right now, as you listen to this, in every direction around you, those faint doors still stand in the darkness. Most of them are invisible. A handful of them, maybe, just maybe, still holding a lit lamp. Maybe the strangest thing of all isn't the fire, or the corpses, or the stars that miss their own birth. It's the scale of human error in the opposite direction. For almost the entire existence of our species, the comfortable assumption was that such a small street, so close by, had already been completely mapped. That there was no mystery left 17 light years away. And the truth is exactly the opposite of that. Even today, the most comprehensive survey ever done of this neighborhood still finds gaps. It keeps updating its counts. It keeps discovering that a supposedly familiar threshold was hiding a new door the whole time. That alone already changes the scope of the question. It's no longer about how many neighbors exist. It's about how many neighbors humanity still doesn't know it has. And every night, whether humanity ever learns to cross that water to them or not, the lights of that neighborhood keep burning quietly out there in the darkness, patient and distant, and older than any calculation, waiting for someone to one day look up, wonder, and learn the long, hard way to cross.